Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election and from a similar angle to that of what we've done before. Today it's going to be another best case scenario video. I've done one for Biden, I've done one for Trump, and now it's time for, I think, the person who's third most likely to win the 2024 presidential race, Ron DeSantis. So we're just going to get right into it here, and we're going to start out by filling in the states that voted for Trump in 2020. Now, obviously, DeSantis and Trump have different strengths and weaknesses. I think we all know this. But in a best-case scenario for Ron DeSantis, he would absolutely be winning and holding on to the states that went red in the 2020 presidential election. And so that starts out, that's going to give him, I believe, 235 electoral votes, which is a pretty good starting point. And to me, I would say that that's exactly where he'd want to be in a best-case scenario. Sorry, not Hawaii. We're going to give him Maine's 2nd district here and Alaska. So that's a good starting point. The only state I think you could debate here is North Carolina, because North Carolina is, again, a state that only went for Trump by about a point in 2020. But in a best-case scenario, I think it votes for DeSantis by just under 5. He won it. Trump won it by a point in 2020, and he had a lot of poor showings in the suburbs. And if DeSantis could, again, in a best-case scenario, kind of revert that trend and do better in rural areas, he can win it by 5. Not too much to ask. I'd also say that a best-case scenario for DeSantis would be black turnout decreasing. Obviously, there's no way he can really control that, but DeSantis would benefit from black turnout in a state like North Carolina decreasing and black voters making up a smaller share of the electorate. So that for him would be beneficial. And that's possible, although, again, it's only a best-case scenario type occurrence. And so the next states, I think, are pretty obvious. I think Nevada and Arizona are good places to start here. These are Biden states from 2020, but they were pretty close. Nevada only voted for Biden by about 2.5, and he only won it because he was able to do just well enough in Clark County, which still did swing to the right. And so DeSantis is, I think, a good candidate for Clark County. He has a decent appeal to working-class voters within the city of Las Vegas, but I think his strong suit in the county would be suburbanites. Outside, in Henderson, North Las Vegas. These are cities that are growing pretty dramatically in terms of population, and so DeSantis would do well here, and that alone would probably be enough to make it close, and just seeing Democrats struggling in rural areas and continuing to lose votes in the city of Las Vegas itself, I think gets DeSantis a 2 to 3 point victory. Arizona, I think, is a bit tougher for DeSantis. It's a more left-trending state. It's a state that Donald Trump lost in 2020, because of self-inflicted wounds. I think he really did himself no favors between insulting the McCains and really having toxic rhetoric for the suburbs. We saw Trump did so bad in Arizona that he lost Maricopa County as a Republican for the first time in over 20 years. And that's significant because it's the largest county in the state. It's home to Phoenix and all of its surrounding suburbs. And when you lose that many votes in a big county like Maricopa that often decides statewide races, you're in a lot of trouble. And so I would say Ron DeSantis in 2024, in a best-case scenario, he could absolutely do better than Trump in Maricopa County if he returns to a more moderate, conservative type of a campaign. It would work well for him in these areas. We could also see continued rightward trends in areas like Yuma. Yuma County obviously swung a good bit towards Trump in 2020, and it's pretty big. Not as big as Maricopa, but it's a county that has a lot of votes out there, and I think DeSantis could do better in the southern part of the state specifically. So, that's it for the Sun Belt type region. I would say there's 2 more states, and again, this is not my actual prediction, but I think in a best case he could win Wisconsin and Pennsylvania by decent margins. Wisconsin would be a bit easier for him, I'd say, because it was closer in 2020, and it has more favorable trends for Republicans. That's not to say that it's like a right-trending state or anything. It's, to me, a lot of conflicting trends, but DeSantis' roadmap in Wisconsin would be to do well in the working class areas. These are areas in the western part of the state that Trump did pretty well into. He swung most of these areas to the right, and we saw Republicans struggle in general in 2022 in the Midwest, but they were able to win, or to actually flip the district congressionally that is represented by these areas. This 3rd district is a working class district that's been held by Democrats for a while. In 2022, the Democratic incumbent retired, and we saw the Republicans pick it up, and that was significant because, again, it kind of solidified the rightward trend among working-class voters in Wisconsin. So I think DeSantis, that's not too hard for him. No matter what, he'll do well with working-class voters in Wisconsin. His issue is the suburbs, and this is kind of becoming a common theme for Republicans, but historically red suburbs like the Wow counties, specifically Waukesha, swung big towards Biden in 2020. Biden did 6% better there, and he actually almost cracked 40, and we saw Tony Evers in 2022 crack 40 in Waukesha. So I would most definitely say to win, Wisconsin stands to have to do better in Waukesha. And it's kind of hard to predict how he'd do that, but to me, it's mostly a return to a more moderate conservative campaign. Again, a lot of these voters are going to be open to voting Republican if Republicans make the right moves. And, of course, in a best-case scenario, DeSantis, we'd have to give him the benefit of the doubt. He would have to say he'd do well in the suburbs, and to do that, he'd have to run a moderate campaign for these voters. So I would say, in that case, he could win Wisconsin by just over 3 points. But, again, it would be tough. It would be very difficult for him to do so. That's why it's a best-case scenario. Now, Pennsylvania is even more difficult because Pennsylvania is a blue-leading state. Wisconsin, to me, I think can make the argument that it's kind of a toss-up, red-tilting state. Pennsylvania is really difficult for Republicans because they are getting crushed in the Philadelphia suburbs, and they haven't made meaningful gains since 2016 in working-class areas. So there's kind of 4 big cities in Pennsylvania, like politically. You have Erie, Pittsburgh, Scranton, and Philadelphia. And the first 3, Erie, Pittsburgh, Scranton, are all working-class cities, and they all trended left in 2020. We saw Erie swung 2.5 towards Biden, Pittsburgh, the county it's in swung 4 points towards Biden, and Scranton swung 5 points towards Biden. And Philadelphia, the city itself, trended red, but the suburbs around it were much bigger and trended blue, and that was what handed Biden Pennsylvania. And so, to me, DeSantis has to do 2 things. He has to get back voters that are working class voters, and I would say he does that in Pennsylvania by really hammering Biden on issues like trade, job growth, and again, Biden to me is a weak incumbent in general because I think he's not a talented speaker. He's weak. I think a DeSantis versus Biden debate would be very bad for Biden, and we'd also have to deal with Biden potentially making gaffes in the campaign trail. So he'd have to get Biden to slip up a few times. Again, best case scenario, these are all hypotheticals, but Biden could slip up a few times. He could, have a bad debate, make some mistakes. I think that there's a lot of working class voters who are, really in the middle, and that could potentially swing them towards DeSantis. I think we'd also see DeSantis doing better than Trump in the Philadelphia suburbs. Not the most likely outcome, but certainly possible. And so those 2 products combined, you get a DeSantis victory in Pennsylvania by just upwards of 2%. And so those are the lean states. Now, the remaining states, I think I'm going to be pretty generous here. We'll start with Georgia and Michigan. Again, these are Biden states. Michigan is definitely harder than Georgia because it's just so incredibly close for DeSantis. But the roadmap for him in Michigan is to just really max out the working class counties and pray for lower turnout in cities like Detroit. And so if that happens, he wins it by 2 votes. Obviously, that's a really hard thing to do. Not really anything he can control, but I think, roll 2 dice, get 2 sixes. That's kind of what you'd see in a best case scenario for DeSantis winning Michigan. Georgia is a bit more in his control, I'd say. The suburbs of Atlanta are a big problem for Republicans because they've been swinging to the left for so long. I talk about this almost every video, and I feel like a broken record. But the Republicans have to do something about the Atlanta suburbs, and they haven't been able to fix it yet. DeSantis would have to really, really, like I said, for Arizona and Wisconsin, he'd have to run a really moderate campaign with these voters. He'd have to cut down on the social issues, talk more about economic fiscal policy. Because again, most voters do not like Biden's handling of the economy. Most voters will tell you Biden has been a bad president for the economy, and all of those voters are wealthy suburbanites. And so when you have that dynamic, there's room to capitalize for DeSantis. So I think he'd have to cut down on the social issues, which again, for him are less popular with moderate suburban voters, and talk about the economy, talk about, typical conservative discussion points with suburban voters that have historically benefited them, national debt, reckless spending, Biden's, plans that I think are a lot more aggressive and progressive than, I didn't mean to rhyme, but, more progressive than a lot of suburban voters want. And that's where you kind of, get those voters back. And so in a best case scenario, I think he does that effectively, and he wins Georgia by, half a point. But again, not the most likely outcome. And I think that's the map. But we're going to be interesting here. We're going to give DeSantis one more state. It's going to be New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a fun one because New Hampshire is a state that Biden did really well in 2020. All these other states that I gave to DeSantis so far have been states that were under 3% in 2020. New Hampshire voted for Biden by 7. And Every county New Hampshire swung left between 2016 and 2020. It's an educated state, and it's a state that Democrats are in good position in for the future. Here's the thing. DeSantis, I think, is a decent candidate for New England, much more so than Trump. So New Hampshire is a white educated state, which means that it's very elastic. It will vote for the more moderate candidate. We saw in 2016 it was very close, but in 2020 it was not close at all. And so in 2024, again, let's just talk broadly, but a best case scenario for DeSantis, right? He's doing well nationwide. He crushes Biden in the debates. The economy's bad. Biden has a 40% approval rating again like he did last year. That would be kind of the perfect storm for Republicans to do well nationwide. New Hampshire would be, I think, like very swingy. New Hampshire is a very elastic state. It swings back and forth, like I said. And in a best case scenario, let's say everything's going right for DeSantis. He has all the momentum. I think New Hampshire gets carried away by the slimmest of margins by DeSantis. He does well with white voters in the suburbs, and he does just enough to win rural voters up here, which have historically been more Democratic in New Hampshire. And he kind of gets that realignment to happen quickly and does better in the suburbs. He wins New Hampshire by 2,000 votes. It would be very close, but I think we're doing best case scenario. Let's get creative here. I think he wins New Hampshire. And so the remaining states would all go to Biden, obviously, by varying margins. I think New Mexico would actually be pretty close. I think Minnesota would also be quite close. DeSantis would probably do well in the suburbs there in a best-case scenario. But other than that, the rest of these states are not that interesting. I think he doesn't really have any upside in Virginia or Illinois, and so that leaves, I guess Nebraska's second district. I think we'll give it to Biden narrowly. But, so DeSantis would win 222 electoral vote, or would win 316 electoral votes. Biden would win 222. And the map for DeSantis, again, would be to moderate in the suburbs, to talk less about social issues. Right now he does a lot of woke stuff, talks a lot about abortion. I think that has to go. Those issues are not popular for him nationwide. He'd have to do better on economic issues, really hammer Biden in the debates, have momentum walking into Election Day, and I think this is the map you're going to get in that best-case scenario. So, again, far from actual prediction, but I think this is a fun scenario to look at, and I hope you enjoyed. So if you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one.